Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD, where every act of compassion becomes a quiet revolution. Before we begin today's story, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever been willing to lower yourself, not out of shame, but out of love, just to see the world through the eyes of a child? Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from standing tall. It comes from crawling low, inch by inch, until a frightened little soul finally feels safe enough to look you in the eyes. If you believe that real love isn't about lifting someone up by force, but gently sitting beside them until they're ready to rise, then please, tap that like button, and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. We bring you real stories, soft, stirring, and deeply human. And today, we begin on a cold tile floor, inside a small-town diner, where a powerful billionaire father watched in awe, as a quiet waitress did something no one else had dared. She got down on her hands and knees, just to crawl beside his scared little boy. It was a quiet Thursday morning in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of southern morning where the sun filters through the blinds in warm strips, and the smell of fresh biscuits and sausage gravy fills the air before you even step inside. The diner wasn't fancy. In fact, it was charmingly old, tile floors in faded chestnut brown, booths with cracked vinyl, and a small family section tucked into the back, where the noise was always just a little softer. That's where Harvey Monroe sat, dressed sharply in a navy blazer and tie, sipping his black coffee with the same precision he used to run one of the largest construction empires in the Southeast. Across from him, a small boy sat silently, his 5-year-old son Ben. The child clung to a stuffed lizard toy, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face half hidden behind the table's edge. Harvey glanced at his phone, then at the boy. He cleared his throat. "You want the pancakes or the eggs?" Ben didn't answer. He rarely did in public. Harvey tried not to sigh. He loved his son, fiercely. But he still hadn't figured out how to reach him. Since his wife passed away 2 years ago, Ben had retreated further and further into himself, often choosing to crawl on the floor rather than walk, especially when he was anxious. The doctors called it dyspraxia, a developmental coordination disorder. But to Harvey, it just felt like one more thing he couldn't fix. Suddenly, there was a loud mechanical pop. The ice cream machine behind the counter let out a sharp hiss and bang. It wasn't dangerous, just faulty. But to Ben, it was a bomb going off. Without a sound, the little boy bolted from the booth and dropped to the floor, crawling fast toward the back wall of the diner, arms tight around his head. The room fell silent. A few customers gasped. A toddler began to cry. The manager poked his head out from the kitchen. Harvey stood up fast, panic on his face. He started to move toward Ben, but a hand touched his arm. "Wait," said a voice. Gentle, but firm. It was a waitress, mid-30s, curly auburn hair pulled into a messy bun. Her name tag read Layla. "Let me try," she said softly. Before Harvey could respond, Layla placed her tray down, kicked off her non-slip shoes, and slowly, deliberately, lowered herself to the floor. She didn't speak. She didn't call out. She simply began to crawl. Not quickly. Not urgently. But quietly, calmly, at the same speed Ben had gone. At first, the boy didn't notice. He was curled near the wall, knees tucked in, rocking slightly. But then, he peeked out. And he saw her. She was still crawling. Her head low. Her arms stretched gently forward. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't tell him to get up. She didn't tell him he was being silly. She just crawled toward him. Like she understood. Ben blinked. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, he shifted. Slowly, he turned his body, still on all fours, and began to crawl back, not toward his father but toward the woman. They met halfway between the tables and the wall, just near the coat rack. Layla stopped. Ben looked at her. He reached forward, tapped her elbow. Then, with the tiniest smile, he whispered, "We're lizards." And Layla smiled back. "I know," she whispered. Across the room, Harvey Monroe stood frozen. He had watched therapists try for months to get Ben to engage in imaginative play. They used flashcards, games, stuffed toys. But Ben never responded. Never spoke. Never connected. Until now. And all it took was someone willing to get on the floor. The next morning, Harvey returned to the same diner, same booth, same time. But this time, he walked in with less confidence and more curiosity. His son Ben held tightly onto his father's hand until they reached the booth. Then, without a word, the boy let go and dropped to the floor. He didn't scream. He didn't hide. He just crawled. Straight past the booths. Past the other waitresses. Until he spotted Layla, balancing a tray of coffee and muffins near the kitchen window. He stopped in front of her and tapped the floor with one hand, twice. Layla paused, glancing down. A warm smile spread across her face. "Hey there, lizard buddy," she whispered, gently setting down her tray on the nearest table. Without hesitation, she got down on her hands and knees again, right there in the middle of the diner. The same brown tiles under her palms, the same creaky booths surrounding them. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't even check with her manager. All she saw was Ben. And what Ben saw was someone who understood the game. They slithered under the nearest table, past a row of forgotten gum stuck to the underside, into a world only children believe in. The fluorescent lights above dimmed in meaning, replaced by the imagined glow of jungle vines and shadowy caves. "This one's the volcano chair," Ben whispered, pointing to a rust-colored stool. Layla nodded seriously. "And this cracked tile right here, definitely a lava pit." Ben giggled. He placed both hands on the cool tile and whispered, "You can't touch it, or your tail burns off." Layla immediately pulled her foot back and gasped. Close call. From a few feet away, Harvey watched, stunned. He had assumed yesterday was a one-time moment. A random connection. But this was a ritual. A routine. Something Ben remembered. Something he wanted. Ben moved to another booth and touched the edge of the leg. "This one's safe," he whispered. "What's it called?" Layla asked. Ben tilted his head thoughtfully, as if the decision carried serious consequence. "Cherry Potter." Layla burst into quiet laughter. "Excellent choice." They moved from table to table, mapping out their little lizard kingdom. Each booth had a name. Each tile had meaning. To the average eye, it was nonsense, a child's game. But to Harvey, it was structure, a story, a system, a language. And for the first time, Ben was speaking it. More importantly, someone was listening. Harvey sat down slowly at the booth and didn't interrupt. He watched as his son crawled with confidence, made eye contact, waited for Layla to respond before moving to the next station. It was the most social interaction he'd ever seen his son initiate. And it was all happening under the tables. Not in a clinic. Not with a therapist. But right here, on a diner floor, with a waitress who had no credentials but more instinct than most experts Harvey had paid thousands to consult. Layla never asked Ben to sit at the table. She never insisted he speak louder or behave normally. She followed his lead. Matched his pace. When he paused, she paused. When he crawled backward, she mirrored him. And with every move, the boy grew more animated. More sure of himself. More at home. Harvey blinked back something he didn't expect, the sting of tears. It wasn't just that Ben was playing. It was that Ben, for once, was inviting someone in. And someone had said yes. It started with a phone held too high, angled just right to catch the scene under table 6. A woman in her mid-30s, sipping a latte and scrolling through her feed, paused when she noticed something peculiar across the diner. A waitress, on the floor, crawling. And not just once. This was the second time she'd seen it. She frowned, raised her phone, and hit record. Layla and Ben were halfway through mapping out Lizard Lake under the dessert bar when it happened. Ben was laughing, actually laughing, his small hands tapping the tile as he described the giant invisible frog that guarded the soda machine. Layla laughed too, completely unaware of the camera capturing their every move. Later that night, the video appeared online with a caption that read, "Quaint diner or low-budget zoo. Waitress playing lizard with someone's kid. Seriously." It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, the post had racked up over 80,000 views. Comments flooded in, some amused, most mocking. "This is what customer service looks like now. Unsanitary and unprofessional. That floor's never clean. Where are the parents?" By morning, the diner's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Customers called to complain. Others demanded to know if what they'd seen online was real. The manager, Mr. Franklin, a man more concerned with Yelp ratings than child development, called Layla into his office. She stood quietly as he shut the door and sighed. "Layla, listen, you know I've always liked you. You're good with people, kids especially, but this." He gestured to his screen, where the video played on loop. "This is not what a respectable diner looks like." Layla opened her mouth to respond, but he held up a hand. "I need you to keep things more professional from now on. No more crawling. No more games. You want to connect with a kid, do it standing up. Or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Layla nodded. She understood. That afternoon, she packed her things and handed in her apron without a word. No fight. No tears. Just a quiet exit, the kind she knew wouldn't hurt Ben more than it already would. Because it wasn't about her. It never had been. She left through the back door, avoiding the tables, the questions, the stares. The next morning, Harvey arrived with Ben like usual. It was their third visit in a row, and Ben, as expected, headed straight for the floor. He crawled past the booths, around the coat rack, and under table 6. But this time, there was no one there. He waited, tapping the tile once, twice, then again. No response. He peeked out from under the table. The usual smile he saved for Layla was missing. He looked around, scanning the room for red curls and warm eyes. But all he saw were other waitresses, busy, distracted, standing. Ben crawled back under the table and sat with his back to the wall, arms around his knees. He didn't speak. He didn't play. He just waited, for someone who wasn't coming back. Harvey, standing a few steps behind, felt something in his chest tighten. He approached slowly, crouched beside the booth, and called his son's name. No response. He tried again, softer this time. Still nothing. Ben wasn't hiding. He was hoping. Harvey looked around, searching for the one person who could explain what had changed. But there were no answers. Only silence, and a child who had been met where he was, now left sitting alone. The silence in the car was heavier than usual. Harvey gripped the steering wheel with one hand, glancing in the rearview mirror at his son, who sat buckled in with his chin to his chest, eyes fixed on the stuffed lizard crumpled in his lap. The boy hadn't said a word in 2 days, not since Layla disappeared. Harvey had acted quickly. Too quickly, maybe. He made a few calls, pulled some strings, and within 48 hours had hired one of the city's most reputable pediatric therapists, a woman with 3 degrees and a clientele list full of high-profile families. Her name was Dr. Meredith Connors, and her methods were structured, proven, results-driven. She met with Harvey privately first, promising him a path forward for Ben, a way to get him back on track. But when Dr. Connors walked into their home, she didn't ask where Ben liked to play. She didn't sit on the floor. She didn't smile. She stood tall, clipboard in hand, and told Ben that he needed to stand up too. "Come on now," she said, her voice clipped. "If you want to grow up and be a normal boy, you need to start acting like one." Ben froze. When she reached to help him up, he let out a high-pitched scream, not of defiance but of panic. He scrambled backward on the floor, hitting the wall with his shoulder. When she stepped toward him again, he covered his ears, screamed louder, and slammed his head against the baseboard. Harvey jumped in, horrified, pulling Ben into his arms. But the boy thrashed, kicked, and cried until he was exhausted, his face red and wet, his tiny body trembling in his father's hands. That night, Ben refused to eat. He sat at the table, silent and rigid, eyes blank. By midnight, he still hadn't spoken. By morning, he hadn't slept. Harvey tried everything: toys, cartoons, pancakes. Nothing worked. Ben was there physically, but emotionally, he had vanished. A light had gone out, and Harvey didn't know how to bring it back. He sat alone in his office that afternoon, exhausted, eyes bloodshot. His phone buzzed with emails, but he ignored them. Instead, he opened the browser and typed in a few words he never thought he'd search for. Waitress crawling on floor with child diner video. The clip came up instantly, the same one he had once dismissed as embarrassing when a colleague had forwarded it to him days earlier. This time, he watched it without judgment. He saw Layla, knees to the ground, moving with patience and grace. He saw his son, smiling, reaching out. He saw connection, trust, joy. And he saw himself, standing in the background, arms crossed, completely missing what was right in front of him. The tears came slowly. He didn't sob. He didn't break down. But for the first time in years, Harvey Monroe, the man who had built entire skylines, felt helpless. And humbled. He pressed pause on the video, froze it on the frame where Layla and Ben touched foreheads in their lizard den. And for the first time, he whispered aloud, "I got it all wrong." Layla didn't expect the knock at her door. It was early, just past 7 in the morning, and she still wore an oversized sweatshirt and socks with tiny holes in the toes. She opened it cautiously, pulling the curtain aside, and froze when she saw who stood on the porch. Harvey Monroe. Not in his usual suit, but in jeans and a plain navy jacket, holding a cup tray with 2 coffees and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. "Hi," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure if you'd even open the door." Layla stepped outside slowly, folding her arms. "Is Ben okay?" she asked immediately, worry flashing across her face. Harvey nodded. "Not really. That's why I'm here." They sat on the steps in silence for a moment, steam curling from the coffee cups between them. Harvey stared straight ahead. "I made a mistake," he said. "A big one." Layla didn't respond. She didn't need to. Harvey cleared his throat, looked down at his hands. "I brought in someone, a professional. Fancy title. Clean shoes. The kind of person everyone tells you can fix what you don't understand." He paused. She told Ben to stand up. Told him he had to act like a normal boy. Layla closed her eyes for a second. She didn't ask what happened next. She already knew. "I watched that video again," Harvey continued, voice cracking. "The one everyone laughed at. And this time, I didn't see a joke. I saw someone brave enough to meet my son exactly where he was." Layla turned to him, her expression softening. "I came to ask you something," he said. "Something I should have asked a long time ago." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a rough sketch on legal pad stationery. A building blueprint. Playrooms. Low tables. Soft mats. Open spaces. A title at the top, scribbled in pen. "The Lizard Floor Learning Center." "I want to build this," Harvey said quietly. "With you. Not as a favor. As a partner." Layla blinked. "You're serious?" "I am. But I can't do it without you. I don't know how to speak Ben's language. But you do." She stared at the paper for a long time, tracing the outline with her finger. Then she whispered, "If we do this, it has to be our way." Harvey nodded. Define our way. Layla turned to him fully now, eyes firm but kind. We don't force kids to stand up, she said. Not unless they want to. We don't make them reach milestones just to check boxes. We crawl with them. We wait. We play. Harvey smiled, a real, tired, grateful smile. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. She took a sip of her coffee, then looked back at the blueprint. Then let's build it, she said. Let's build a place where crawling is celebrated, not corrected. The ribbon was green, the same shade as the plastic lizard that had never left Ben's side, and it fluttered slightly in the soft spring breeze. Dozens of chairs were set up in rows beneath a white canopy outside the brand-new facility. Parents, therapists, educators, and city officials filled the seats, their faces curious, some skeptical, most hopeful. Above the door hung a wooden sign, hand-painted by local artists and children alike. It read, Lizard Floor Learning Center, where every journey begins at ground level. Harvey stood off to the side in a navy blazer, hands clasped in front of him, watching everything but saying nothing. There was a microphone on the makeshift stage, but he didn't approach it. This wasn't his moment. Instead, Layla stepped forward. She wore no makeup, no suit, just a deep green blouse and a simple necklace made by one of the students. Her voice trembled slightly as she began, but steadied as she spoke, not from a podium, but from the floor. She sat cross-legged on the wooden platform, microphone in hand, looking up gently at the audience. When I first met Ben, she said, he was hiding. Not from the world, but from the pressure to meet it on someone else's terms. He didn't want to walk in straight lines or sit at tidy tables. He wanted to crawl, explore, and imagine, from the ground up. She paused, smiling softly. I learned something under those diner tables. I learned that when a child feels safe where they are, that's when they begin to grow. Not when we pull them up. But when we get down beside them and say, it's okay. I'll stay with you here. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A few parents wiped tears. This center isn't about milestones. It's not about checklists. It's about presence, patience, and seeing the world from the level of the ones we love. Then, without warning, a small figure emerged from the side door. Ben. Wearing a full lizard costume, a soft green hoodie with tiny felt spikes along the back, matching joggers, and brown gloves that mimicked little claws. The audience gasped softly, not at the costume, but at the confidence in his steps, or rather his crawl. Ben dropped to the floor and began to move through the aisle, slowly, deliberately, crawling around the circle of chairs. He tapped each tile with purpose, as if remapping a world that once felt too big to belong to him. No one laughed. No one whispered. They watched, silent still, as this tiny explorer made his way around the room. When he reached the center, Ben looked up at Layla, who was still seated on the stage floor, her eyes glistening. He crawled toward her, and then slowly, deliberately, stood up. He walked the final few steps, threw his arms around her waist, and whispered into the microphone she still held. I'm ready to stand now. The audience stood as one. Applause erupted, not polite, not forced, but full-bodied and emotional. People clapped with their whole hearts, some with hands to their mouths, others with tears running down their cheeks. Harvey remained still, watching from the corner, until Ben turned to him. Their eyes met. Harvey didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he bowed his head, the slightest motion of deep respect, toward the woman who had taught him something no doctor ever could. That sometimes the only way to lift a child is to kneel down beside them and wait. In a world that often rushes to correct, fix, and normalize, this story reminds us of something quietly powerful. Healing begins not when we ask others to rise, but when we are willing to meet them where they are, even if that means getting down on the floor. For older generations who've raised children and seen life's ups and downs, this message holds a familiar ring. It's not our advice, our instructions, or our expectations that build the strongest bonds. it's our presence, our patience, our willingness to sit in silence beside someone until they feel safe enough to speak. Whether it's a grandchild learning differently, a neighbor facing quiet grief, or even an old friend who's become distant, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to crawl beside them. Not to push them forward, but to remind them they're not alone. Because love, the kind that lasts, doesn't always walk ahead. Sometimes it kneels down and waits. And maybe that's the kind of love the world needs most right now. If you believe that sometimes the greatest act of love is to get down low and walk beside someone in the dark, then leave a like for the woman who gave up her job just to crawl next to a frightened little boy. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more true, heartfelt stories of compassion, courage, and quiet hope. We'll see you next time. And until then, may you never be afraid to kneel for love.